like what? Oh, okay, got it, okay. I'm Yewande Komolafe. I'm here in the NYT Cooking studio and we're making chapatis today. Chapatis are an unleavened flatbread that are made from just a few ingredients and cooked in a pan. The whole reason I got into making chapatis from scratch was because I was doing some research on the Rolex. The Rolex is a street food that can be found on the streets of Kampala in Uganda. It is basically a chapati and an egg omelet that are rolled into each other. So Rolex, the name comes from saying rolled eggs a bunch of times. If you say rolled eggs, it kind of like meshes into each other and becomes one word called Rolex. You know, I think that it was really interesting to discover like the story of how the chapati, which is like an Indian staple and a Southeast Asian staple, ended up in a place like East Africa. It's a story about forced migration. It's a story about adaptation. And I could relate to it because, of course, I'm an immigrant in the United States. So this particular recipe is one that I got from Kiano Moju, who's a recipe developer. She shared with me her family's variation on chapatis. It is a very flaky chapati, which is actually similar to paratha, which is another unleavened flatbread. Kiano, who is Kenyan, shared that this process of making chapati is particular to her family and is something that her grandmother makes daily. Chapati is usually made with a whole wheat flour. Kiano's version allowed me to improvise with all-purpose flour. And so if you want to make a more traditional version, you can use whole wheat flour, but we're using AP flour today, so. This is salt. I'm using grapeseed oil today, but you can use any vegetable oil. You can use ghee, which is more traditional. So with the water, I'm gonna do 1 cup of water first. And for the rest of the water, I'm gonna kind of feel my dough to see how dry or wet it is. You definitely don't want a dry dough. You want it slightly sticky, slightly wet. You're looking for something that holds together, but is sticky. Okay, so I'm gonna add 3 more tablespoons in. It does feel soft, which is what I want, but I feel like there's still too many dry spots, so I'm gonna add some more water. Let's just do all 6. Why not? And you'll see, because there's a little oil in the dough, it doesn't stick entirely to the bowl. Like it's coming off as I pull it. So I'm gonna put a little flour on my surface and then transfer my dough down here and then just flour my hands. So I'm not really adding flour to the dough because I like the consistency of it. I'm not trying to make it tougher. And the more you work it, the easier it gets to handle. But in kneading it, I'm like stretching and pulling the gluten strands. This is the part where you just like put on some music and zone out. If you poke it down and it immediately springs back up on itself, that means it's not relaxed. But if you poke it down and it sinks in and stays and like slowly comes back up, then it's like the dough's chilled. Not chilled as in refrigerated, but like chilled as in like it's relaxed. So at this point, I'm just gonna allow this little guy to chill out in a bowl, covered. You wanna cover it so it doesn't form a skin on top. So our little dough guy has rested. Let's see if it springs back up. So it's doing it slowly. You can still see both depressions in there. I'm gonna cut it into 8 pieces. You can use a scale. I'm just gonna wing it, eyeball it. keep them covered while you work on one. So it's kind of this like weird shape. I'm just gonna tuck the bottoms in. So I'm using like the cup of my hand as a guide. And if I wasn't using my thumb, the dough's gonna sort of move everywhere. But because I'm guiding it with my thumb, it just stays in like the cup of my hand. So I'm gonna let this rest for 10 minutes before the next step. So you wanna do this on like a lightly floured surface. I'm gonna roll it out into a nice round shape and then stretch it. And so I'm rolling it once and then turning it about 1/4 of an inch just to keep the round shape of it. So you want just like a 4-inch circle, and then you can start to stretch. And this is where all that kneading that you did really comes in handy, because then when you stretch, it doesn't pull the dough apart. The gluten strands stretch along with the dough. So I'm just going to use my rolling pin for the edges where I couldn't quite get as thin as the center. So this is what actually creates all the flaky layers, is a combination of stretching the dough really thin and the oil. So a little bit of flour. And then you roll it up. And this is why it doesn't matter if you get holes in the dough as you stretch, because in the end it gets rolled out like this. So what I'm doing is squeezing all the air out. And now this gets curled onto itself, and this end piece goes underneath. And so now I have to do that 7 more times. So I'm taking each spiral and rolling it out into like a 9-inch round. And again, every time I roll, I'm turning the spiral about 3/4 of the way. I would say this is kind of there. I'm gonna add some more oil to my pan. So I'm cooking it on like medium low. I like to brush it with oil as it cooks. You can see the little air pockets. That's all the layers that we spent time creating. So I flipped it once, brushing it again. You kind of just like flip it back and forth and brush it every time you flip it. I think it takes about 4 minutes total. You can go play with your friend. Perfect. So I have my cooked chapatis. I'm gonna break one. I don't know if you could see like all the flaky layers in it. That's what you're going for this particular version of chapati. I cooked these ones off a little doughier than usual because I'm using them for the Rolex. So they're gonna get toasted off again. But yeah, it's really good. It's like really flaky. You can see how easily it flakes and how easily it peels apart. Like the little nice charred parts are really toasted. And I imagine that if you use a whole wheat flour, it'll be more like nutty and more toasty. But yeah, this is a good chapati. I should say that you don't always have to make your chapati at home to make the Rolex. You can purchase chapatis and make the Rolex that way. This is supposed to be like a quick and easy breakfast. It's really simple and straightforward. For my eggs, I have some cabbage. So I'm gonna slice the cabbage really thinly, some onions, and some serrano peppers. You can take the seeds out if you want. You can keep the seeds in. I'm gonna add a little bit of salt. So I'm just cooking up the vegetables to soften them a little bit. I seasoned with a little salt. I'll add some black pepper, and then I'm gonna add the egg. I realized that I'm using a metal fish spat in a nonstick pan, but for those people that are watching and judging, don't judge me. All right, so it looks like my eggs are done. I think a tiny bit of salt on the tomatoes. And this is the whole thing about the Rolex. It's a rolled egg. And so you just roll it up in a chapati. And I'm gonna cut it so you see the inside. And this is why it's a Rolex. Ooh, hot. And I immediately got a kick of the spice, but it's really good. I mean, I would eat this for breakfast or lunch or dinner. Like, I would eat this any time of the day. I should say that I still buy chapatis. I'm not making chapatis by scratch every single day, but it just makes it really special to know that I can make it now. I'm so grateful to Kiano and her grandmother. You can find the chapati, the Rolex, this and more recipes on nytcooking.com. Do I have to say .com?